Hello, welcome back. So we're learning about exceptions, right? And obviously one of the things that you can do, because there is inheritance in Java, is to inherit from exception class, which is the superclass we saw, right? So you can extend the exception class and create your own custom exceptions. Let's go ahead and try to create one and then also understand or learn when we would want to do something like that. So I'm going to create a new class that is going to be the new exception that we are creating, right? I'm going to create a separate package for it because this is how I'm going to type it exception. So this is how you would have your classes kind of like organized. If you have a bunch of exception classes, custom exception classes that you're defining, you may want to keep them in a separate package, right? So I created a separate package and then let's call it custom exception. We don't need a main method. Hit finish. Now, just like the same extends that we saw earlier, you just say extends exception. Now, exception being a concrete class, not an abstract class, you don't need to override anything, but it doesn't make sense to just do this, right? That the whole point of extending from exception is to be able to define something that is custom for our application. Let's say one of the things is an error code, right? Private int error code. So we want to throw a code that makes sense for our application. Could be 1, 2, 3 or 100, 200, doesn't matter. Some error code that will uniquely identify a problem, right? And then we can also say private int error message. So we have two, sorry, it's got to be a string, turn, private string error message, right? So we have two fields that make sense to just our application, which is why we extended exception class and defined them. Now we can go ahead and create our constructor. We can say generate constructor using fields, hit OK. I'm gonna create the getter and setter. So right click, source, generate getters and setters, select all and hit OK. And we can even add a toString, right? Source, generate toString, hit OK. There we go. We have the custom exception class defined where we're going to have our own exception that has an error code and error message. Now we can try to use it. We're going to go back to the section 6 package, right? Right click, new class, and let's say this is custom exception test. We'll create our main method because we want to run this class, right? Hit finish. I'm going to create a method that is going to open a file for us, right? Same like we did in throws test. So we want to say public static file reader open file, and that's going to be a string file name as a parameter, whatever we want to open. And in there we can say file reader for equals new file reader of file name. We have to import this guy, so file reader control space. The import is there, java.io.file reader. Now let's say what the error says, unhandled exception. We know that the constructor throws this exception. Let's try to catch it, but instead of printing a stack trace, we're going to use our custom exception, right? We already saw the throws that you add to the method signature here. Now, for a custom exception, to throw that, you would say throw, not throws, it's throw. And custom exception is a class. We need to create a new object. So a new custom exception, right? Now we know the constructor needs two parameters, an error code and an error message. Let's say I want to use the code 100 and a message of file file name not found. Put a space here and then a semicolon. So we are throwing new custom exception. So it says cannot be resolved to a type. That's because it's in a different package, right? So you can say import. There you go, imported. So since custom exception is defined in a different package, we need to do an import for Java to know which custom exception we're talking about. Now we have another error. Let's see what it says. unhandled exception, custom exception. So we're saying that this method is going to throw this exception. We don't have a place where we are catching it or define the throws, right? So you need to match it with the throws here. Throws custom exception. Now what the other error says, this method must return file reader, right? So we don't have a return statement. We can say return fr. Let's define or declare this outside and then remove this guy. Okay, we just have to initialize it to null here. Return. There you go. So we have open file method defined that is going to throw custom exception, and the actual throw statement is here. So what we are doing is we are catching an exception and throwing custom exception. Let's just talk about why we would want to do something like it, right? So if you are creating an application with tons of classes, you may have different exceptions that are being thrown. If you may want to have a consistent way of handling the exceptions, right? You may want to know, um, you may want to display an error code for every message or every error, so that with that error code you can uniquely say, identify, okay, this is the place where the problem happened, right? So that's one reason where you may want to create your own custom exception and use that everywhere, so that there is a consistent way problems are handled in the program. So let's try to go, use that open file. Let's say file reader fr1 equals open file. I'm going to give a file that doesn't exist, right? test2.txt. We already created test.txt, but we want to see if the exception handling works. And then this is going to throw a custom exception, which we need to catch. And here you can say system.out.println of e, right? We're giving the object here because we defined a toString, which is automatically going to be executed when we try to print an object. Let's try to run it, see what happens. So right click, run as Java application. So we got a custom exception, right, which is our exception with an error code and error message, right? This is much more meaningful from a debugging perspective or troubleshooting perspective, where it is throwing an exception that you know with an error code. So if you have thousands of lines of code, but using unique error codes, if you see error code 100, you know where it failed, right? So that's basically one of the reasons why you would want to create an exception by exception class by extending the exception class that comes with Java. So that's basically inheriting or extending exception to create your own custom exception. You can go ahead and add more fields that make sense, that you want to add to the exception class, and then try to basically pass it when you're creating the object for it, right? I hope that made sense. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.